So, hi everyone, I'm Rob Young. I'm a business owner and a member of the Chamber's Government Affairs Committee. I'll be representing the Greater Issaquah Chamber of Commerce today as we interview Chad Magendanz, who's running for state representative of Washington, and he's in position 2 in District number 5. And Chad has been honorable enough to agree to answer some of our questions so we can get to know him better, and that should be good. The Chamber's come up with some questions that are relevant to business owners today, and they've come up with 8. We'll see how that all goes. But he's going to have 2 minutes to respond to them, and that should be good. So let's rock and roll.
All right.
So, Chad, welcome to our discussion. If you could take 2 minutes and share why you're running for and the top 2 things you want constituents to know about you as a candidate that make you uniquely qualified for the position.
Sure. Well, I've had this exact position 2 terms prior, and that was from 2013 to 2017 when we had a bipartisan legislature. And if you remember, I actually challenged the incumbent senator, got 49.7%, and that kind of took me out of politics for a while. Since then, I've become a teacher. I've actually enjoyed that. But I'm looking at the years since leaving the legislature, and I don't believe one-party rule has been beneficial for the state or especially the business community. You know, I look at some of the crime statistics. I look at the trends of new taxes and increased B&O taxes, and I was getting concerned. And frankly, when they came back to me and asked me to run again for my old seat, I thought there was an opportunity to get a little bit more balance back in Olympia. I'm proud of my voting record. During the 2 terms that I served, I had the most independent voting record of anyone representing the 5th District for the past 30 years. My opponent is a good partisan voter. She actually votes party lines more than 96% of the legislature, and even more than most downtown Seattle Democrats. And so if your goal is to have, single party representation, you should, keep her in office. But I think people in swing districts like ours want to see a little bit more balance. People who will consider every issue by issue and not just, follow the party leadership blindly.
That makes sense. Thanks, Chad. And I've actually known you during all those sessions that you've been rep too. So appreciate that. Yeah. The second question is that, everybody in the country has an electrical grid problem. But in the region that we're in, it's reaching maximum capacity, and cities like Issaquah are without a redundant energy infrastructure, which is an issue. With the state's climate action plan and push towards an electric renewable energy, what are your plans to support the infrastructure, and will you support Energize East Side?
So actually, I have an electrical engineering degree from Cornell, and although I've spent most of my life developing software, I'm still a big believer in infrastructure and the electrical grid. In fact, my oldest right now, he works at US Cybercom, and defending our electrical grid is one of the most critical pieces for our defensive stature right now, because it's getting pretty old. And I mean, you see what's happening in California right now. I mean, they're like the example of not what to do. We're lucky, though. In our state, we have the 2nd greenest and the 2nd cheapest electricity in the nation. And mainly because we made some very smart investments back in the early 1900s with our hydroelectric power. Generally, that's between 80 and 90% of our power is from hydroelectric sources. And so, we typically have 90 plus, up to like 95, 96% of our electricity is generated from renewable sources. But we have to get access to that cheap green electricity in order to take advantage of it. And especially since I was one of the, I was the prime sponsor for the only electric vehicle bill to pass when I was in the legislature during those 2 terms. A lot of that was focused on infrastructure build out for electric vehicles, so we don't get in a situation like California's in, where they're making heavy investments in electric vehicles but don't have the infrastructure to support it yet. And so we definitely do need to think about this from an infrastructure perspective and make the heavy investments where it's needed to get the electrical power from where it's generated into our local communities. I was also an engineer in the Navy, nuclear engineer, and ships engineer qualified. And so I'm a big believer in nuclear power. We have 1 nuclear plant that's providing electricity for our state, but we have another 16 in nuclear reactors on Navy ships that are moored along our harbors. And so I would like to see further investment in nuclear.
Well, that sounds good. Thank you, Chad. Now, one thing is the Issaquah Chamber is a catalyst and a champion for the business community, for everyone to know. And Washington's economic competitiveness and the vitality of any community is reliant on healthy businesses, no matter what size they are.
Mhm.
Do you consider yourself business friendly? And also, can you give examples in the legislative issues that you'd support are beneficial to the business community?
So I was in the private sector for 20 plus years, mainly in the tech sector. But although I'm a teacher now, I actually have a side hustle. Voter Science is a company that I'm a founder of, a partial owner on, and we're incorporated in Bellevue right now. And we do political analytics and campaign tools, and I develop software for Android and iOS for that. And so I've signed the front of a check. I know what it's like to run a small business, and I very fortunately was blessed with not having a lot of the struggles that most of the small businesses went through during the COVID lockdowns. It's been rough. I mean, brutal actually. And so if you look at my voting record, I think that speaks volumes. I have a 92% lifetime rating with the Association of Washington Business. I have a 95% lifetime rating with the NFIB, the National Federation of Independent Business. I have multiple awards. I have a Champion of Small Business Award from NFIB. I have a Chairman's Award from AWB. And so, yeah, I think my record speaks for being very friendly to the business community. When it comes to investments for the community as well, I've been very much focused on education. And so I was one of the lead negotiators for the McCleary school funding fix, where we doubled school funding from the state over 8 years. We're now the 5th highest in state funding for schools. We're only $109 away from being the 3rd highest. And so we made some pretty dramatic improvements in that area as far as investing in future generations, your future workforce. Now I think we just need to focus on using that funding more effectively. We lost a lot of ground during the lockdowns, to the point where only about 30% of our students in the state are meeting standard in math. And so we've got some major distance to make up here to make sure that they have the 21st century work skills needed to survive.
Right. Okay. Well, thank you, Chad. And nationwide, we're seeing an increase in crime. When it comes to public safety, what initiatives would you support to keep citizens safe and reduce criminal activity? That's a big one.
Yeah, it is huge. And you see it even in the suburbs here. King County wide, the murder rate since 2019 is up 72%. And that's pretty significant. You look at the property crime rates, though. Those are the ones that really shocked me. Property crime rates, let me actually pull those actual numbers up so I give you the latest numbers. I actually combed through the records for every single police department in King County and then unincorporated King County as well to make sure that I got these right. But the rates in Bellevue were up 21.5% for property crime. In Maple Valley, it was up 38.3%. In Issaquah, it was up 40.7%. Black Diamond was up 56.2%. And Snoqualmie was up a whopping 61.3%. So yeah, this has become a huge issue. And there's two bits of legislation that I think are most responsible for this. And they're kind of results of the defund the police movement. But House Bill 1054, which restricts the police pursuit. That was a huge part of it. So you're seeing a lot of people pulled over and then just driving away because they know that the police can't pursue them anymore. And then the Blake decision was the other thing. So the Supreme Court found a technical issue with the way we were prosecuting drug crimes. And rather than fix the technical issue, what they did is effectively legalize hard drugs. And so, this has made drug use so much easier, and the drug users on the street know that they can basically light up right in front of the police officers, and there's very little they can do about it. And it's spilling over into our communities on the east side as well. And so those are the two things that I would focus on. I would want to highlight that I am endorsed by the Washington Council Police and Sheriffs, WACOPS, as well as the King County Police Officers Guild. And so I do have good support from law enforcement as well as parental groups.
Got it. Okay. So We know that the B&O tax has always been something that's been necessary in our state, in our city economies. We also know that businesses support a large majority of local nonprofit organizations. As we're experiencing losses in the stock market, increased inflation, continuing supply chain issues, and employee shortages, inflation's really real. How do you intend to support businesses during this economic downturn?
Well, the first thing I would do is I'd roll back all the B&O tax increases that they've enacted since I left the legislature. I don't know why or how they're justifying these increased taxes, but we had the largest surplus in state history last year, and yet they still keep finding new opportunities to introduce new taxes. And that's just B&O. We got a new capital gains tax, which is in litigation right now, but I did not support the capital gains tax or any income taxes for that matter. We have a carbon tax that's now being implemented. We have a low carbon fuel, effectively a tax because that's going to drive up the cost of fuel. We have long-term care payroll taxes that were enacted. So, I would roll those back. I would support trimming the sales tax by 1%. I think that's going to help a lot of retail businesses and a lot of consumers. Sales tax is one of the most regressive taxes we have, and yet no one's willing to reduce that when they keep introducing these new taxes. And then little things like, if you're trying to move product around the Puget Sound area, these tolls and interstate highways, they're not helping at all. And it's one of the highest overhead income sources that we have. Whether you like the gas tax or not, you have to recognize that it's very low overhead. Over 99% of that goes to the programs they're funding. But the tolls, we're lucky if we get to keep 30% of the tolls that we collect and actually apply them to the programs.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. I've heard all that, Chad. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Now, a big topic, housing and housing affordability.
Yeah.
Are in a supply and demand issue that cannot be solved by government alone. Knowing that the East Side has some of the highest land costs in the state, what are your plans to address housing? And I know that there's not a miracle cure there.
Yeah, I know this is a complicated issue, and I think a lot of it is because there were some tough land restriction measures that were put in place in the early 90s, the Growth Management Act being the most obvious one. And they've restricted the supply of land that can be developed, all the while our population has been growing dramatically. And so we really shouldn't be surprised that prices are increasing. That's what happens with a supply demand curve like that. And so I'd like to revisit a lot of the assumptions of the Growth Management Act and determine if specific issues are actually helping achieve the long-term environmental goals of that program. And maybe we can find some opportunities to relax some of the restrictions and allow more affordable land development.
Okay.
This is also a huge issue for the schools too. I was co-chair of the school siting committee when I was in the legislature, and this was a problem when I was president of the school board as well, is the the restrictions they have for school development. You have to be inside the urban growth boundaries. You end up going in there and basically displacing a lot of people at very high property values when you could develop in other areas.
Right. Okay. So there's a lack of efficient and reliable transportation hinders many areas on the East Side and making housing and hiring more challenging than it has been for the business community. Share your position with Sound Transit and coming to Issaquah and the King County transportation system that lacks north-south routes from Renton into Maple Valley to Issaquah. And I think I heard that it was being delayed, but I'll let you.
Yes. I mean, I was actually on board with Sound Transit until Sound Transit 3. Yeah, I mean, most people look at approximately $1,000 per year for the typical East Side household to pay for light rail. And the fact that it was coming to Issaquah, even though we weren't going to see it to 2041, I can understand why a lot of people were supportive of that. But what it really came down to is the cost per mile. And we were showing extremely high cost per mile, even on their initial estimates. And that was before the cost overruns and the schedule creep. Okay. So these schedule delays are killing us. I mean, I don't know if I'm ever going to see the rail reach Issaquah. But when I talk to people about this on the doorstep, they want the benefits of high density, but they don't want the high density. So rail transportation is typical for high density urban areas like Seattle. And we're not anywhere close to that density. Even downtown Bellevue is still below the threshold they usually use for justifying dedicated light rail like that. Usually the solution is bus rapid transit. And I'm a big believer in bus rapid transit because bus rapid transit is considerably cheaper. It's appropriate for the density that we have, and it's adaptable as new high-tech companies come in. Like, for example, we got Facebook coming in. We've got Amazon introducing 25,000 new jobs into Bellevue. We're growing like crazy, but we don't necessarily know exactly where that growth is going to be. And for example, for people like me, commuting to Microsoft, sound transit is not a very effective solution there because you end up taking a very roundabout, circuitous path. And so I really believe that that we should be optimizing for the density we want. The other thing that's really driving me crazy about this is that I also think that transportation investment should follow demand. Currently, 65% of total transportation spending is on mass transit and 37% is on sound transit alone. But the projected 2050, and this is 2050, regional mode shares still only predict that 8% of daily person trips will be carried by transit and only 3% by sound transit. So that's a major mismatch in what's being funded by compared to what's actually going to be used.
Gotcha. All right. I know that's a big thing. And we'd like to leave the last question to you, Chad, open-ended so that you could speak directly to the business community. This is where that's going. What would you like to share that maybe we should ask during the interview, but we didn't ask?
Okay. So, I mean, you guys know me. I have a proven track record here. That I do this out of a labor of love just because I got involved with education through the school board and then through McCleary down there. But I still see that there's so much we need to do to make sure that we have a skilled workforce. And a lot of people don't want to talk about the skilled workforce, but when you look at the surveys that are done by small businesses, workforce issues are still a major problem. And making sure I'm a career and technical education teacher right now, and I look at getting kids certified. Last year, my classes earned 398 industry certifications from big names like Microsoft and Adobe and Unity. So I understand what kind of skills are needed for a skilled workforce. And so that has always been my focus. In fact, it's been in my tagline and my signature for probably 15 years to close the skills gap. If you look at my record, I've got the Cornerstone Award from AWB. I got the Guardian Small Business Award from NFIB. I was selected Outstanding Legislator from Community Employment Alliance. So I've got a lot of recognition there. But really, it all just comes down to one question. I would ask of the business community, are you and your businesses better off today than you were when I represented you 8 years ago? And I just have to let you answer that question for yourselves.
Sure. Hey, Chad, one last thing, do you think that besides getting skilled in college, blue collar workers, skilled labor positions that don't necessarily have to be college driven, they can be locally supported or state supported? Do you think that's something realistic for the state to help get more in? Because that problem is around the country, by the way.
Yes, and actually, when I was in the legislature, I had a budget proviso that was passed that tasked the Education Research Data Center with looking at the salaries, the median salaries for 10 years of all students going through our 4-year universities, our 2-year technical colleges and community colleges, and then we added certificate programs and apprenticeship programs. And it's been really enlightening. And so I make a point of spending time with our high school counselors to make sure they know just what kind of opportunities kids have if they want to go into apprenticeship program or earn their industry certification. Because in the tech industry, I just know that if you're interested in computer science or tech, you can actually get more from one of those certifications, those almost 400 certifications that my students earned. It's worth more in the industry for the first 10 years in median salary than going to college for 2 years to get an associate's degree. And so that's just the low hanging fruit. I think there's lots of opportunities like that we can do I'd like to see more internship opportunities for high schoolers so they can get that job experience before they're kind of heavily invested in a particular career path. I want them to kind of get some hands-on skills so they know what they're getting into.
That makes sense. Thank you for answering that. So today's interview with Chad's been recorded and we'll be adding it to the Chamber YouTube channel for public viewing. And I'd like to thank Chad for taking the time to address the business community and answer some of